I'm delighted to welcome you all here this afternoon for the panel presentation about the Bruce Nauman San Jose installation that we are titling here Time Tunnel, to try to make a connection between the 1970 installation that happened here in this gallery at San Jose State, then San Jose State College, and now San Jose State University. And we will be having the entire curatorial team that worked on this project speaking to us tonight. This includes Dory Bowen, who is Associate Professor of Art History and Visual Culture here at San Jose State. Tony May, an Emeritus Professor of Art from San Jose State, who was involved in the original 1970 installation and who oversaw the current reinstallation. Keith Daly, who is a cross-disciplinary artist and an alumnus from San Jose State, and Constance Llewellyn, who is adjunct curator at the UC Berkeley Art Museum and the Pacific Film Archive. We also have a separate component in the Theda Belcher Gallery, which has been done in conjunction with this particular project, in which San Jose State Digital Media faculty Andrew Blanton and Rhonda Halberton will also join our panel in order to contextualize the current recreation of Nauman's corridor as a virtual reality corridor in the Belcher Gallery, as I mentioned. So these two exhibitions are going on concurrently. Dory will be introducing her panelists, but I wanted to introduce her as well. As mentioned, she is Associate Professor of Art History here at San Jose State. She holds a BA in Media Studies and an MA in Interdiscipline Art, and her PhD is in Visual and Cultural Studies from the University of Rochester. Her essays have been published in a variety of collections, including The Companion to Art History since 1945 from Blackwell Press, Otherwise, Imagining Queer Feminist Art Histories from Manchester University Press, and Histories of Arab Documentary, the American University of Cairo Press, which is forthcoming. Her book, Bruce Nauman, Spatial Encounters, along with Constance Llewellyn, is being published in 2018 by the University of California Press. So, Dory, I welcome you, and thank you all for this amazing work that you've done. This has been a multi-year project, and we've had a tremendous number of people working on it. So, please, Dory, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I wanted to first acknowledge, as Joe said, this has been a multi-year, multi-people project. So I wanted to thank the Dean of Humanities and Art, Shannon Miller, for her grant for this, Art and Art History Department Chair Anthony Rainsford for his support of this throughout, from the Natalie and James Thompson Gallery, Joe Farb Hernandez, Aaron Wilder, and Cynthia Cow, without whom we couldn't have done this, from Tara Miko, Joe Ranieri, Huve and Gabe Pacheco, photographers Mike Batty, Nin Phillip, and Tran, and Keith Sanders in Media Technology, who is overseeing the videotape of this panel. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to introduce the panelists, and we're all going to talk for about 5 minutes about our relationship to the project, and then we're going to open it up to questions. So Constance Llewellyn, adjunct curator at the University of California, Berkeley Art Museum, has curated major exhibitions, including The Dream of the Audience, Teresa Hak Chung Cha, Everything Matters, Paul Koss, a retrospective, Ant Farm, 1968 to 1978 with Steve Seid, A Rose Has No Teeth, Bruce Nauman in the 1960s, Alan Ruppersberg, You and Me, or The Art of Give and Take, and co-curated State of Mind, New California Art, circa 1970. In 2015, she published 500 Cap Street, David Ireland's House, and is currently publishing Bruce Nauman's Spatial Encounters with myself. Secondly, Tony May, Emeritus Professor of Art at San Jose State University, where he taught from 1967 until 2005. His art has shown widely in California and other parts of the U.S., as well as England, France, Japan, and Thailand. May was a classmate and friend of Bruce Nauman's while at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and participated in the construction of the original corridor with Mir at San Jose State College in 1970. Born the first week of May 1970, at the same time Bruce Nauman's San Jose State Corridor was built, Keith Daly's presence on this panel signals the impact that this co-emergence has had on his postgraduate life. Daley holds an MFA from San Jose State and a pre-doctoral degree in political and social communications from the Sorbonne. His cross-disciplinary practice draws from avant-garde, minimal, and conceptual gestures, looking through doors, corridors, life, and death. Daley sometimes speculates, not without deadpan, that he's a reincarnation of Marcel Duchamp, who passed a few months before he was born. If you recall the beginning of this bio, you'll notice it starts and ends with the word born. Andrew Blanton is a media artist and percussionist. He received his BM degree in music performance from the University of Denver, MFA at the University of North Texas. He is currently assistant professor of digital media at San Jose State University. His current work focuses on the emergent potential between cross-disciplinary arts and technology, building sound and visual environments through software development, and building scientifically accurate representations, complex data sets as visual and sound compositions. Rhonda Holberton is assistant professor of digital media at San Jose State. Her multimedia installations make use of digital and interactive technologies integrated into traditional methods of art production. She received her MFA from Stanford and BFA from the California College of the Arts. She was a CAMAC artist in residence at Marne-sur-Seine, France, and awarded a Fondation Tenot Fellowship in Paris. Holberton has recently exhibited at San Jose Institute of Contemporary Art, Fifi Projects Mexico City, San Francisco Arts Commission, and Berkeley Arts Center. So I am going to start with a short presentation, and then we will have the other panelists present on the project as well. Willoughby Sharp breathes heavily. I just came out of your room, Bruce, and it was one of the most touching experiences, sincerely, that I've ever had of a work of art. It just sort of knocked me over. Originally recorded in 1970 on 2-inch videotape, I found this interview in the San Jose State University Library. After months of anticipation, it was digitized, and finally, this lost document, which Keith Sanders helped to digitize, pertaining to Bruce Nauman's corridor, was available for viewing. The video begins with two men sitting across from each other in swivel chairs on a platform in the San Jose State broadcast studio. Sharp, on the left, is interviewing Nauman in conjunction with his corridor, recently installed in the Art Department Gallery the first week of May, 1970. Sharp's casual demeanor, his right foot hangs loosely over the platform, his teeth uneven, his hair long and unkempt, belie his ambition. This 34-year-old New York-based performer, arts writer, curator, recently co-founded Avalanche, a hip art magazine featuring innovative artists rather than critics and museums. Sharp laughs nervously in his chair. I wonder, what can you say about that room, Bruce? Nauman looks down, and his response is telling. Not very much. It seems like it's very much a one-person piece, two people maybe, at the most. Anything else will destroy it. At this moment, the sound of an electric saw is layered under the voices while the image track breaks away from the two men on stage to a cropped black and white image of Nauman's hand operating an electric saw. The video will scroll through 40 such images while the interview continues on the soundtrack. Sharp will continue to probe Nauman on the issue of accessibility throughout the interview, while giving eloquent descriptions of his experience in the corridor, describing the soft quality of the light and the way space is felt with one's ears. After the video runs through the series of images showing Nauman and others in the gallery, the sound and image coincide once more, returning to the artist and curator on stage. This video interview, conducted just after Sharp encountered Nauman's corridor in the now Thompson Gallery, is a rare document of the 1970 installation. However, significant parts of the interview are missing in the print version published 1 year later in Avalanche, the primary means by which this corridor is remembered today. None of the stills featured in the video are included, and sections of the dialogue are excluded as well, including the opening section I just quoted. Can the unpublished portions of the video interview tell us something about the corridor that we don't know? Can they speak to the context for the installation? Why, for example, Willoughby Sharp and photographer Gianfranco Gorgoni joined Bruce Nauman for the installation at San Jose State College? Or about Sharp's relationship to the college, why he would return to it over the next few years to record more video interviews and even stage a performance. Or about Nauman's relationship to Tony May, who is shown in the gallery in Gorgoni's contact sheets and who went to school with Tony in Wisconsin, both students of Steve French, who moved from Wisconsin to San Jose State and invited Tony May to teach here. What about this complex web of affiliations? What is remembered today of this installation? The impression derived primarily from the transcription of the video in Avalanche is that it's Bruce Nauman's installation. The Nauman issue, as it's called, begins with a headshot of the artist by Gorgoni. With expectant lips and eyes slit like a cat, Nauman's head fills the entire square page of the cover from forehead to chin, while a shadow splits his face equally, suggesting the artist as both seer and outsider. The photographs by Gorgoni chosen to accompany the interview in Avalanche support this idea. Instead of placing this installation in a network of people, 29 years old at the time, Nauman is shown dressed in simple black t-shirt with jeans, smoking, lifting boards, hammering, gazing into the mirror, and finally looking down the corridor at his reflection. This impression of the work belonging more to the artist than its place or time is supported by the idea that Nauman's works are concepts and not objects. Nauman does not think of this installation as an original, and thus our reinstallation is not really a reinstallation, but simply another version of the concept. Yet Nauman's drawings for the corridor sketched in the gallery suggest otherwise, implying that it somehow belongs to the gallery, and indeed its dimensions are scaled precisely for its insertion into this space. What these prior documents and accounts do tell us is that the mirror at the apex of a V-shaped corridor is intended to create unlikely reflections, at least three. One of the corridor extending into space past its dead end, a reflection of the adjacent corridor with its occupant, where it seems the viewer's reflection should be, and a reflection finally and suddenly of the viewer as he or she approaches the mirror. We can add a fourth reflection today, for hindsight is another kind of reflection. This panel seeks to use hindsight as a wedge to open the corridor to time and to our time, to Silicon Valley, to the changes that have occurred in this region since 1970, and to the people involved in the production of this corridor. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My job is to give you some background, what Bruce Nauman was doing in the years leading up to this 1970 installation. I only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to talk very fast. Nauman came to California in 1964 to attend graduate school at UC Davis, where he received his MA in 1966. After leaving, he taught part-time at the San Francisco Art Institute and lived there at 144 27th Street in the Mission in San Francisco, and also spent a year in Mill Valley until moving to Southern California in '69. The exhibition I curated in 2007, A Rose Has No Teeth, Bruce Nauman in the 1960s, focused on the work he made in the Bay Area and demonstrated how he laid the foundations for his subsequent work during this brief but extremely fertile period. In many ways, our forthcoming book, Bruce Nauman's Spatial Encounters, which is focused on his architectural work, takes off where that 2007 exhibition and catalog left off. The last work featured in the show was Performance Corridor, and as we will see, it was the first of the many corridors and related installations that would dominate Nauman's work of the 70s and periodically beyond. Nauman's corridors found their origin in performance and the body. He performed live twice while a student at Davis. In this one, which was recorded later on video, manipulating a fluorescent tube, he strikes and holds a variety of poses on the floor in relation to a glowing fluorescent light fixture, using his body as one element and the light as another. His next body of work consisted of fiberglass sculptures that are somewhat anthropomorphic anthropomorphic in nature, as you can see. And this little booklet that he made as an artist project called Pictures of Sculpture in a Room consists of photographs of 4 of the pieces and shows how he saw them in relationship to the site. Hand to mouth, I think that I have this sort of out of order. Duh. Hand to mouth this is a drawing of a piece that actually was made of moulage, a sculptural material. It was one of many in which he used idiomatic expressions and then cast them in art, and so from hand to mouth. And also might have something to do with the precarious nature of his finances at that moment. Here is another of his cast pieces. This is actually, people always think this is Bruce Nauman's arms, but they're actually the arms of his wife, Judy, which he cast. And so he did a whole series of works in which he cast body parts. So as I said, body was one of the main concerns in his work, and has continued to be so. This one, neon templates of the left half of my body, taking at 10-inch intervals, is a very idiosyncratic way of measuring his body, taking his own body as the template and then fashioning green arcs of neon around it. This Next, he started making films. We're very familiar with these early films of his that have been shown, I don't know, thousands of times. This one was one of the first in the summer of 1967 when he had moved to Bill Wiley's studio. Bill Wiley was a teacher of his at Davis and was on sabbatical, and so Nauman and his family moved into his house and studio. This piece, Art Makeup, is one of his first film works, and it's supposed to be shown, and was shown in my show, in a room with 4 walls so that you're standing in the middle and you're seeing 4 projections surrounding you in which he paints his body variously white, red, green, and black. Art Makeup is, he said about it, it has whatever social connections it had to do with skin color, but really it had to do with the idea of making up art makeup. He's using his body, obviously, as a canvas. Here's one of his very well-known early films. He did many of these 10-minute films, borrowing equipment from the San Francisco Art Institute, which had a very active film department. He's in Wiley's studio, and he set himself up with various tasks, all had to do with, he said, like dance exercises for a non-dancer. Playing a violin. And this one is actually a video. In 1969, he spent the winter in Southampton, and he had access for the first time for a video camera, and he was able to extend these performances to 60 minutes, as this one is. But this is the one that most concerned us. It's a video. It's called Walk with Contrapposto, and it's what led to the entire Corridor series. Interestingly, he was in New York at this time. He had built a structure as a prop. This is the structure. You've probably seen pictures of this. It's very narrow, 20 inches. And he walked up and down it, shifting his body like contrapposto, and that became the video. He never thought of this as a sculpture. He thought of this as a prop. But as he was in New York, and Marcia Tucker, who was then a curator at the Whitney, was doing research for an exhibition called Anti-Illusion Procedure Materials, which would feature Richard Serra, Eva Hess, Robert LeVay, Robert Morris, Michael Asher, and other artists associated with process art or post-minimal work that depend less on the fact that new materials are being used than on the fact that the acts of conceiving and placing the pieces take precedence over the object quality of the works. Anyway, she came into his studio, saw this in his studio, and said, I'd really like to put that in the show. And he said, well, wait, it's really not a piece, it's a prop. And she said, no, I really would like to show it. And so eventually he relented, although he was very adamant about the fact that it had been a prop. So that henceforth it was called Performance Corridor. Let's see. We can see then, this is the piece in the show. That's the Anti-Illusion show. And you can see the kind of work that was in it. On the right, on the floor, is Richard Serra. That's another Richard Serra. Bill Bollinger has that sort of net piece in the back. I think that's an Eva Hess on the left. You can't really tell. But you get a sense of what the show looked at like. So henceforth, that piece has been shown this way. And it is his very, very first corridor. And from then on, he goes on to many, many others, obviously the one here, and others that become increasingly complex, using video, mirrors, as he did here, monitors. This is one of his best known. It's called Green Light Corridor. It's probably the one that's been rebuilt the most often. And I'm ending with this, which is a piece that most of you will be familiar with, I think. It was an iconic sign that he made actually in that grocery store storefront, which was his studio. And it says, you know, the true artist, I'm getting a little crazy here. The true artist helps the world by revealing mystic truths. And he said later about this piece, you know, it was really myself asking me, what is the role of an artist? And I think that if you could summarize in a sentence or two what Nauman's work, all of it has been about in its many phases, is really that. What does it mean to be an artist? And so, from now on, we will talk about this person installation, and I think next up is Tony May. Thank you.
So we haven't had a dress rehearsal for this, so. Yes, I'm just advancing these. So I asked Aaron to select just a few of the stills, or a few of the proof sheets that were shot by Gianfranco Gorgoni, who came with Bruce Nauman when he did the installation in 1970. He came with them because they were preparing for this book that Gorgoni published, which I don't think we've seen yet. It's actually called The New Avant-Garde, I believe, is the title of it. And it deals with about 10 different artists, including Bruce and Sarah, and so on. And anyway, Gorgoni was here the whole time that Bruce was doing the installation, but he did not stay long enough for him to ever have photographed it when it was completed. So I believe that's one of the reasons that certain people are interested in this recreation of it, because we think this will be perhaps the definitive depiction of what it looked like completed. I guess my background with Bruce has been somewhat described pretty well. We were classmates in Madison. He graduated in '64, as I did. We graduated with our bachelors at the same time. He came to UC Davis for MFA. I stayed in Madison, got my MFA. I worked with Steve French, and Steve's wife is here right now. Wanda French is here. That's why we saved her a place in the front row. And anyway, Steve was very instrumental in, you know, as you heard, getting me this job, where I spent the next, you know, virtually the rest of my life, 38 years to be precise. And then of course, when this project came up, I found myself in this unusual and sort of distinctive situation of being perhaps the only person that actually still remembered the original construction of the thing. But I do have to add that I did not remember much at all. So what we have here is a pretty good example of restored memory, because now I remember a whole lot. And so I don't know if you can tell, but I do show up in a few of these photographs. Does anybody recognize me, though? That's the problem. Let's see, let's advance here. Yeah, so there. I seem to have been there. And the only thing that I actually remembered ahead of time was that I had taken Bruce to the store where he purchased the mirror. Literally, that was all I remembered. And I thought perhaps if I worked on it a little bit, it might have been between classes or something like that, you know. Let's see, I should be advancing, huh? So, yeah, I seem to have been one of Bruce's main consultants, as you can see here on the left. And maybe we have a detail, I don't know. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. And it seems like we were kind of rehearsing for a dance or something as well. Not sure what that was. The other thing that we were unable to completely restore the original appearance of the thing, because the gallery has changed just ever so slightly. We no longer have the full ceiling with fluorescent lights, and we also no longer have that wonderful black and white marbleized tile, which left at some later point. Anyway, let's see. Oh, I think maybe that's the end of my thing already. That's okay. This is a piece that I did quite recently, since I got quite involved in this project, and I had been keeping these shoes in a drawer for years. They were shoes that Bruce had made for me when we visited him once in LA. He was living in Pasadena, and he had these very clever looking, very cute hippie-ish sort of shoes that were custom made by some local shoemaker. So I said I really liked them, and so he had a pair made for me, and he sent them to me, and I wore them for a bit, during my hippie phase, and then they were put in the drawer, but they were sitting on my table for a long time in the last year while we're obsessing with Nauman, and it just occurred to me I could do something with them, so I put them in this reliquary. It's a second-class reliquary with footlights, and I think it's actually become rather a favorite piece of mine. So I think maybe that's enough.
Hello, I'm Keith. So I wrote notes this morning, and I don't like reading notes, so I don't have them. So this slide is sort of the inception. There are a lot of ways to look at this project, and thinking of it in terms of inception is maybe a little doesn't give a very good picture, but it's one of the points of inception, I should say, because I had been told that some of my practice reminded my instructors and some friends and people of Bruce Nauman's work. And then someone had also said, I think he taught at San Jose State. So I thought, well, that's great, because I was just about to start my graduate program here, and they said, oh, that's great, and I'm going to be going where Bruce Nauman taught, and I was really excited. So I did some research, and I found out, I Googled Bruce Nauman, San Jose State. That's what anybody would do. And I found out that, no, he hadn't taught there, but what he had done, and this, this is actually, when I Googled this back in 2014, this was the first hit on Google. So it would be up there. And as you can see, it's been populated by, oh, thanks. Could you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Can you still hear me? Oh, okay.
Louder.
All right. Okay.
It's for the video.
All right.
It's for the video.
So anyway, and as you can see, it's been populated by more recent events, but this was back there. And this is a blog, and I've been looking at other sections of that blog. And it's not really an art blog, it's kind of a design blog. I'm not sure, the guys, I forget where they're from, but I mean, they're involved in the arts somehow. Their most recent post is Robert Filiou. And so it's not like the Guggenheim's website or MOBA's website, it's some stuff like if I did my own little website. So it was interesting that this information was coming out of the internet from some, unsanctioned source in a way. But the information was interesting, it was critical to start the project in a sense that you see here the picture by Gorgoni. And there's just a few lines up there, and that's what was the what started my research. And so I looked up what this Avalanche article was and who Willoughby Sharp was. I had no idea who these people were. And I came upon an anthology of writings on Bruce Nauman in which Willoughby Sharp's interview was published. So let's see. I approach research from the point of view of an artist, but then in my artistic practice, I spend a lot of time reading books and observing more. I have more of an analytical approach to art, and in that case, I'm more of a researcher. So I don't have a very, there's no clear boundary for me in terms of artistic practice and research practice or art historical practice. And this is a sculpture I did around that time, around 2014, that I think illustrates a little bit the notion that you can make a sculpture out of scholarship. And I think Connie's book is in there. A rose has no teeth, the bottom one, the yellow one. This sculpture actually was made by someone who was associated to UC Davis, where Bruce Nauman got his MFA. And it's just standing out here outside our doors, and I never see people look at it. Our graduate studios are right behind that sculpture, and so I used to walk by there a lot, and sometimes I would have my lunch there, and I also started to want to build a rapport with the sculpture. You know, and this is Nauman-esque, I guess you could say. But yeah, Gerald Wahlberg is the artist who made this sculpture, and he was definitely at UC Davis as a student. I don't know if he went on to teach there. This is a gate. For those of you who spend time in the foundry, you know that in order to make to pour bronze or any of those metals, you have to first create a gate. Now, the gate is really something that's discarded very quickly. It's not a means in itself. I was interested in making a sculpture of a gate. So taking the medium and placing it as the final object. And I would walk around with that gate, and when I felt very anxious about things, graduate programs are kind of stressful. I would twist the gates, the wax that you saw before, and that's sort of an image of my viscera, of my stomach. I'm going to get back to this Nauman project. This is another sculpture. It's text-based. If you speak Japanese, you might understand what it is, but if you speak Japanese, you won't understand why those two words are juxtaposed. The first one, wakame, means seaweed, and the second one means I understand. And once I was in Kyoto, and some friends were speaking Japanese, and they asked me, "Are you okay? Do you understand what we're saying?" Obviously, I had no idea what they were saying, but I said, "Wakata, wakata." I thought I was saying wakame, wakame, but I said wakata, wakata, which means seaweed, seaweed. So you can't read the words directly unless you have a mirror. Just thought I would connect that with our mirror. This is a work where I used a gallery bench that's actually, you'll see it in the Thompson Gallery. That's normally not used in student galleries, and I was interested in a group show that we had with the MFA program to displace an object actually it was in storage at the time, but it wasn't normally used in student galleries, so the idea was to displace an object from its normal site into a different site. And I'm getting to the idea of site here because this Nauman project is, of course, intrinsically related to this site, San Jose State University. Another project that involved site, but more on a human-based level, is After Asher, sort of a study of the late artist Michael Asher, and involved San Jose State faculty Janet Silk, who's here, and G. Carey Hobbs, who's sitting to her right. I think I'm running out of time. All right, I always run out of time. It's terrible. Somebody asked me this recently, and I just thought it was an interesting question. This is Tony May working in the gallery 2 weeks ago, and gee, I had so much more I wanted to say. Okay, it's always like this. And this is Tony working in the gallery 47 years ago. Nothing has changed. A lot has changed. But Tony's still here, and I've worked with him. My main input in this project has been to work with Tony, and I'm very grateful for that experience. Thank you.
So this is Andrew Blanton.
And this is Rhonda Halberton, right?
And we both headed up worked with some students to create the VR installation. So we'll be co-presenting, so 2.5 minutes each.
Yeah, that's true. And I just wanted to point out also that, I think Tony was saying that the floors in the gallery had changed since, but you'll note that the floors up here actually have not changed. And we're looking at the same gallery floors.
And in the VR installation, it's the same floor.
Right.
Yeah. So a little transplant there.
So anyway, I just wanted to start. I'm going to read a quick prepared thing, and then I'll hand it over to Rhonda, and she can also talk about it. But we'll talk about sort of jointly, like the way that we were looking at this, the entirety of this thing. So anyway, my principal areas of work on this project were in building a team, building out the virtual and physical installations in the Belcher Gallery. Generally, in my practice, I'm not so interested in photorealism within virtual spaces, but this project provided a unique opportunity to push a small team of students to work on a project that has historical significance, conceptual depth, and is technically challenging. It's amazing for me to think that Nauman had installed this work in the same gallery 48 years ago. This is, from my perspective, incredibly important to the students to begin contextualizing their work in terms of history of San Jose State. It's also interesting to consider where this program has been and the artists that have come through this program over the years. Much of my own work deals with phenomenological experience and experiential outcomes. In this way, Nauman is a very important figure to me, and this installation is particularly significant. With rebuilding this experience in the digital space, some very particular technical questions came up about how to accurately represent those experiences, including the mirror and the sound while being in the corridor. In working with Unity gaming platform, students are challenged to think about the typical use of this technology and consider how we can adapt, repurpose, and reuse the technology for more critical discourse within art. So much of what we do in DMA is focused on the critical discourse within the use of technology in our daily lives. When the curatorial team invited Rhonda and I to join, I was really happy to be a part of this because I think it's an exemplary example of how we can use technology to further cultural discourse. In this way, it was really interesting to work with the students and to try to convey some of these thoughts and ideas, challenges to them. Principally, how do we build digital spaces that can complement, augment, and ultimately help us as humans to understand our own perception of our world? How can we use the bleeding edge of technology to build and further a cultural discourse within this space? Cool.
Thank you for that. So one of the things that I think was most interesting to me about this project was that I felt like it was building on some of the themes that Nauman, these are just kind of a few process shots that show 360-degree view of the gallery that we then use to take materials and then import into our three-dimensional model. This is one of our crew, Michelle, and so this is one of the things that interested me the most was the connections to some of his corridor pieces that use not mirrors, which he actually refers to in the interview that Dory was speaking of as, he talks about the video, closed caption video loops as electronic mirrors. Right, so he's thinking about mirrors and video both as technologies, but as something that can split the body from its retinal self, but also kind of memory of the body. I liked really what you were, Dory, talking about, this kind of hindsight. So most of his corridor pieces are just making subtle shifts to experiences that rely on memory to tell us what we're supposed to see, and then he augments what we're supposed to see with those subtle manipulations of material to kind of split our retinal and physical self, but in ways that kind of narrow the gap between the two. So in this piece on the left, there's a video camera facing you as you walk down the corridor, and one that kind of is behind you. As soon as you approach down the corridor close enough so that you can see the screens, you're out of the view of the camera that's facing you. So you're kind of constantly chasing your own image and never able to quite see yourself. And then the same is true for the corridor here on the right, so that you're kind of chasing when you will be on camera, you're kind of turning a corner and you can't see the television that you'd actually be on. So this kind of chasing of the self is something that I think VR is constantly doing. And the other thing that I like in that interview, he's talking about feeling with one's ears, right? It's this synesthetic experience, right? So in VR, you have bodily experiences that feel like motion sickness, that feel like fear when you kind of walk over an edge. Your stomach kind of, tinges. But these are completely retinal experiences. It has nothing to do with the experience that your body is kind of engaged in. And so again, this kind of synesthetic experience, often accompanied by this kind of refusal of the body to engage in such an experience by way of nausea. So I want to warn everyone that this is a really common experience. So just be careful when you go in VR. And there was one, there was one quote that I was going to read, but I think for the sake of time, we've kind of covered a lot of these concepts. But one thing I do want to make note of is in the same interview, Nauman's talking about a conversation he had with Meredith Monk, who was a choreographer and a dancer. And he was really interested in a lot of these early pieces, the kind of exaggerated walking, contrapposto, or walking around a square. He was really interested in physical experiences that you can think about, but that don't match the action of doing it, right? So VR space does another thing where it kind of marries these two, the retinal or the cognitive kind of perception and the bodily experience of kind of enactment. So I think it's really easy to get caught up in the whiz-bang, woo, kind of aspects of VR. So I want to kind of lay those as maybe questions that we can kind of continue with between Nauman's physical installation and the one that we've got over in the Belcher Gallery.
There were a number of films that he produced, short and long. I was wondering if those are accessible, or
Yeah, Electronic Arts Intermix is where you rent art films. You can go online, and they have all of the Nauman videos and films. Those are there for rent or purchase. So when one does an exhibition, that's where you obtain the film or the video.
Questions? Sorry. I was hoping to see you put on the other side.
I'm curious if you have to get permission to do the VR version of this project from Bruce Nauman, or what he thinks about that. And who owns this piece that's here? Does San Jose State own it, or does the Guggenheim own it?
Guggenheim.
So actually, that was Joe Farb Hernandez's idea to deal with the disability issue, because many of these corridors cannot be displayed because they are too narrow or too difficult to enter. So the idea of having a virtual corridor, which we actually did get the okay for from the Disability Center, was a way to make it accessible to more people, interestingly enough. That's where initially it came from, but I think it's actually, at this point, an important component of the exhibition. Being in Silicon Valley, it's sort of the other end of the 50-year spectrum between when it was first installed and now, because the environment is such that many people experience architecture this way. But initially, that was, if I'm not wrong, that was your idea to...
Yeah, we just knew we had to make it accessible to everybody, and so we're kind of thinking of ways, talked with the DMA people.
But as far as what Bruce Nauman thinks about it, I'm not sure, actually. Juliet Myers is coming out, his studio manager, for the next panel, February 13th, and it'll be interesting to discuss with her. But we will own that piece, even though the Guggenheim owns the idea. So I don't know if we'll actually be able to show the virtual corridor without the permission of the Guggenheim, because it is another instantiation of the corridor.
Good question.
Interesting question. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I realize, so this isn't a direct question, but more I would enjoy hearing some elaboration maybe from Dory, but about, I mean, you talked about how it relates to Silicon Valley now and so on, but maybe a little bit more about the zeitgeist, how it relates to this time versus in the 60s.
Versus that time. I mean, one thing that was interesting that came out of my research was actually the history of corridors. And I was saying to Rhonda that the corridor is a technology that had its moment when Bruce Nauman built this corridor. And this building itself was built only 5 years prior and was a controversial building because of the nature of the relationship, the corridors to studios. And so you have to think 50 years back that he was building a piece that reflected the corridor outside the gallery, where now the corridor seems dated. It was of its moment, and the corridor was inserted specifically into this gallery with the same dimensions, so that you'll see when you enter, it looks like kind of a stray wall that juts out. And we don't think of architecture as technology. Now, 50 years later, it reflects on its site in a different way. Maybe the fact that the site has not changed, but also that many people experience encounters, phenomenological encounters, which is open for debate, as Keith is saying, online. And there have been much speculation about what you can or can't. Here you'll have an experience of both corridors, which is really very interesting. I had a similar experience to Keith's where I got stuck in the corridor, where my body knows how to get through a physical corridor, but I had no way to get, I just kept running into the wall, and I couldn't find my way to the end of the corridor. So I had to, as you said, it also has to do with one's literacy in this space, a new space that's emerged. Rhonda? Yeah.
So I think one of the things that having the virtual component does is highlights the difference between physical experience and VR experience, right? The deficits in both virtual but also in physical experience, right? So very rarely is it the case that you are going to be immersed in a virtual environment adjacent to an installation whose whole purpose is to kind of modify your phenomenological response to the built environment. Also, because it's such simple, when you guys see the installations, because detail is removed, it's really just walls, I think that that's another space where you can decide for yourself and make up the difference, right? Where are the differences? And part of that's going to be, the learning curve and kind of feeling awkward in VR, but the longer that you stay with both spaces, I think, the more interesting and complex those questions will become.
And the more comfortable we'll be in each of those spaces.
Yeah, exactly. Or not, right? Yeah.
We have time for one or two more questions. Dory, do you want to wrap up at all? Or?
Well, I wanted to ask Tony just to talk about sort of where you've come with this project, which took about, 2 years that Keith came to me talking about the avalanche essay, and then we spoke to Tony, and it really took years that we've been thinking about it, and I was just wondering, since you were involved in the first project and it has jogged your memories, what you think about this piece now.
Well, I'm very happy that it's finished, among other things. But no, it's been really incredibly complicated and rich and diverse experience being involved with it. As I mentioned, I didn't remember much about my initial participation in it, and that sort of did come back to me. I do have a few other thoughts, but I'm forgetting. Yeah, maybe we'll think of it. We can talk further in the gallery when it opens. It is going to be a problem. Everybody's going to want to experience this, and it is pretty much essential that it not be packed like the telephone booth, college prank. If you go in with a lot of other people, the experience is greatly altered and somewhat just. Yeah, damage, it's really not possible. Yeah, if I think of my other...
Yeah, we're only allowing one or two people in the corridor at once, because you'll lose the sensation, and it can also be dangerous. But especially you who are students here, you have all the time in the world. It's up until February 23rd.
I know what I want to say.
Yes.
Just remember that, the fact that it took pretty much 2 weeks, not 2 full weeks, but 2 weeks of our time to reconstruct this. And I was so amazed as we were doing that to think that Bruce did this in 1970, pretty much with just a couple volunteers, as far as we can tell, but we don't know who they were. And we have, Gianfranco Gorgoni's documentation of that whole process, but as try as we would, we were never able to identify the other people. And I do actually seem to be the only person who was on the faculty. There are still a few of us alive, but who has any memory of it. So obviously not much was made of it at the time when it first first opened. You know, it kind of was slipped in and out without much fanfare. And Bruce was not yet that well known or anything. So, and I think we should also say, you know, Steve French probably was the person who invited Bruce to do the installation here. We don't really know who was the gallery director, or if in fact there was such a post, you know, formal post at the time. But definitely, probably Steve was the person that invited Bruce to do it and made that possible.
Well, I just want to plug our book. Bruce Nauman, Special Encounters. Dory and I, and Ted Van, who's in the audience, are the three authors. My essay focuses on the work as a whole, his architectural work, including corridors, rooms, tunnels. Dory's is an in-depth analysis of this piece. It's really amazing new research. And Ted did a wonderful essay on Bruce's Nauman's drawings and how they fit into this whole project. So UC Press will release this book in, I think, December. Yes. Thank you.
And thank you all for coming.